First of all, I would like to welcome you to Istanbul and Marmara Forum. My name is Başakın, Dr. Ulaş Akın. First of all, I would like to give you some information before starting our panel, technical information. We have Wi-Fi connection in the room. Maruf 2019 is our password. Maybe you cannot connect to 3G, 4G or other GSM operators, so you can use our Wi-Fi connection to have access to our mobile apps. This would be more efficient. The second technical information I would like to share with you is you may want to ask questions to our panelists. You can ask your questions through your application, so it is very important that you have the internet connection and that you download the app. So the name of the panel is Sustainable Urban Infrastructure for Livable Cities. You can go to the Q&A part of the application and you can ask your questions. When you ask your questions, I will have them on my screen and I will ask these questions to our panelists in the last 5 minutes of our panel. So I would like to introduce our panelists to you. Mr. Argyris Orayopoulos. He is a researcher in the United Kingdom. He is also working in different public institutions in the UK. He is active both in the academic and professional world. Marina Olshankaya is working in Slovakia, Avantgarde Energy. She is the founder and advisor of the company. She has also experience in the field of energy and infrastructure. Matthias Finger is based in Switzerland, in Lausanne. Network industries management leader there. He has taken responsibilities in various infrastructure projects and processes. He is also a guest member of faculty in Istanbul Technical University. Our final panelist, Olga Shapelanskaya, is working for an advisory company, consultancy company in India. And she has experience on innovative approaches in sustainable management. So first of all, I would like to welcome all of you to Istanbul.
Professor Matthias Finger, we have 15 minutes for his presentation. Floor is yours, Professor.
Slides. Okay, teşekkürler.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Let me make a 15-minute presentation of what we are doing with this thing that we call IGLUS, Innovative Governance of Large Urban Systems. This is a training program. There is a stand over there, but what I would like to share with you is the way we conceptualize the urban systems. And when we talk about urban systems, we mostly talk about infrastructure systems. The word, maybe I should go back a little bit. I'm a professor of management of network industries, but the other word is infrastructures, basically. And those are national systems. Electricity is national, railway is national, telecom is historically national, water was local, air is global, but we want to focus on the urban, the metropolitan area, because we think that this is the new big challenge. That's where the problems are, that's where the solutions can be found, that's where we have the greatest impact. So we're talking about infrastructures, large urban systems, urban energy, urban transport, urban urban communications, urban water, that's mainly the focus. The word governance comes from the fact that the political entity, the city, does not correspond to these large urban systems. We talk about metropolitan areas, which in the typical case go beyond the urban boundary. Now we have, Istanbul is quite unique because we have Büyükşehir, but already now, which covers somehow the large metropolitan area, but the reason why we have Maruf is precisely that already Istanbul has gone beyond Büyükşehir. Okay? So that's the reality everywhere. And the last word, innovative, actually we changed that. In the beginning we called it intelligent for ICTs, because there is a lot of digitalization now permeating absolutely everything, okay? And it comes on top of that. So let me present this, and the slides, I have done these handwritten slides because if we do these nice slides, it gives the impression that this is solid knowledge. It's not solid knowledge, okay? This is the way we are conceptualizing things. It's not because I'm lazy, it's because I think there's a message here. And so we have, in the urban systems, we have water, urban energy, urban transport, housing, the built environment, telecom, and everything needs to be governed somehow, okay? And that is absolutely not obvious at all, because you can take transport. In a metropolitan area, there is a problem of transport already. I just take one example, because the different municipalities have different transportation systems. Don't look at Istanbul, it's quite unified already, but in many cases, with igloos, we go around the world, we visit all the major cities in the world, it's chaos. There is no unified transportation system. So even if we have trains, for example, in the city, we have metro that is local, we have trains that is national, we have trams that is a local. All these things need to be coordinated. Energy is the same, water is the same, housing is worse because it's even, and all these, on top of this, they all interact. Of course, transport without energy doesn't work. Water without energy doesn't work, so there is another governance issue. So I put governance around all this because simply you have to make this somehow work. So it does work most of the time, but it is totally inefficient. It could be made much more efficient. So on the bottom, that's the way we conceptualize things. Urban systems need to be efficient, resilient, and sustainable. Now this sounds very much cliche. And actually in the beginning we said we can't use these words. They are cliche, they're not real words, you know. Everybody talks about sustainability, but we didn't find any better words. At the end, it is still about an efficient system, and I'll have one slide on this. It is about a resilient system. I have another slide about this, and it's about sustainable system. So I'll go into these three, and that's the performance. Of course, that's the performance of the urban systems. Behind that, you will have quality of life, you will have attractiveness, things like that. That's more difficult to conceptualize. But let's just stay with the infrastructure systems. I think those are the three metrics we can look at. Okay, so governance. Governance needs to be done in order to make these systems efficient. And I put one thing there, and smart cities. I don't use the word smart city, but there is something to, if there is something to smart city, it's efficiency, okay? People will sell you smart city with 1,000 other things, happiness and everything. I think this is all blah blah, but efficiency is real. Thanks to digitalization, to linking to better, what does digitalization do? Digitalization improves the coordination about the fragmented parts, and it creates efficiency thanks to that. Inside the transport modes, across the different modes, across the different political entities of the urban area. So I think, of course, we could coordinate in the past, but digitalization will make things more efficient. Think, for example, about mobility as a service app that coordinates the different transport modes, and people say smart city is green, it's more sustainable. Yes, because it makes things more efficient, but not because it's sustainable, more sustainable. Then we have rebound effects and things like that. But I think that's the way we can look at, and I think many of the things we see is about making things more efficient. People want to spend less time, they want to spend less money. Thanks to digitalization, we don't need to really develop all the infrastructures to the peak. We can sort of smoothen out the peaks. There are many, many contributions when we do, for example, we link energy and transport. We can, electric vehicles that feed back into, there are huge efficiency gains across jurisdictions, across industry, across the different network industries, and so I think that's the most obvious part. Okay, it doesn't mean it happens, but at least and technology, and that's why I put governance on top of digitalization. It's not because we have digitalization things will be more efficient. Digitalization still has to be governed and organized. It doesn't happen by itself. But at least there is a technological potential here, okay? I'm not naive, I'm a political scientist. I work with engineers. My engineers, they believe that technology will solve all the problems. And I do believe that technology helps, but it must be governed at the same time, okay? So resilience, okay. So resilience is about something different. Resilience is about making urban, that is more recent. Resilience is about making urban systems better capable to resist shocks. Okay? So there was an earthquake last week, but it can be any shocks. It can be an epidemic. It can be a terrorist attack, it can be a heat wave, it can be a water shortage, or a flood or something like this. And I think increasingly, we're living in so densely populated areas, minor breakdowns of the system, a blackout or electricity blackout, very difficult to survive because you won't get water. It's not because you don't get electricity, you won't get water, okay? So how do these urban systems resist, or can you make them more resilient to resist these shocks? That's the second conceptualization. And these shocks come from outside. They do not really come from inside. I have two things here. Again, digitalization. Digitalization helps in terms of resilience. You can see better the links, you can monitor this better. If you go to a disaster center here and observe, digitalization really can help you. But there is another element, that's people's participation. If you really look at the shocks that the big cities experience, you will see that all these nicely planned systems generally don't work as well as they should have. And ultimately, it's the people that take things in their own hands. And so it's also about social resilience, about self-help and things like that. It can probably be combined with digitalization and the apps and all that. But for me, those are the two main things. And again, I put governance on top because you have to govern the digitalization as before, and you have to somehow facilitate the participation. You know, we are living in cities where people are individualized, where, you know, you have to create community and things like that. And so governance also helps here. And in my last slide, I want to talk about sustainability. And sustainability is about the relationship. So you see the three pictures. The first picture, if efficiency is the city is a self-contained system, and you basically optimize the system, okay, and make it more efficient. The resilience, the city is still a self-contained system, but it reacts to shocks, and it can react better or less well to shocks, and you can govern that. Sustainability is different because the city, the urban system is part of a larger environment. The water typically does not come from the city, the air does not come from the city, the food does not come from this, the energy comes from somewhere else, okay? The climate is done somewhere else. So the city, even though we optimally manage the city, it will always be dependent on the larger environment. And sustainability is about that, to somehow manage the relationship with its environment. You can have a very efficient city, a very resilient city, but if you have to bring your food from I don't know where, if you are in Dubai, you know, then it's really not sustainable, okay? It may be very efficient, which is not, but it could be, but it's certainly not sustainable, okay? And so I have two things here to make it more sustainable. Again, you need, I put here green. Green, because I don't have it on the list. But in Iglus, we talk about green infrastructures. It's not just transport and energy and things. Green is part of the urban infrastructure, but it cuts across. Green is, you can also do water and things like that, parks, trees, things like that. You can have them everywhere. Little parks on the railway tracks, in the gardens, things like that. With sustainability, climate change, things like that, I think green will become more and more important. Urban food growing will become important for cooling, for things like that. And that will not happen without participation again, because yes, you can manage green infrastructures, and I think in Istanbul we have nice examples of all these trees and flowers and that are, and the green infrastructures need to be managed in exactly the same way as any other infrastructure. You need to water these things, otherwise they will just die, they don't survive. So it's part of the infrastructure investment and management and things like that, but it's also about people's participation in this. So basically, and of course, again, this has to be governed somehow. So basically, the different levels, the different infrastructures are linked to each other. There are cross-cutting issues, which is digitalization, participation, and green in different forms, including little ponds and lakes and rivers and things like that. It's part of the city, and it will increasingly be part of the city. And all the things have to be governed across jurisdiction, across levels, and together with the people. Thank you.
Actually, we have still 35 seconds, but thank you very much for the very nice introduction, Matthias. He provides us a framework of the concepts, because we get lost in the concepts. We don't focus on the meanings, and it was very useful to have a conceptual framework about what we are talking, and you focus on the intersectoral issues, where we have a lot of specialists, but few people to combine, connect, and coordinate. Yes, last week there was an earthquake, and maybe I understand you right, these GSM operators, none of them work. And it was not a big earthquake. So it was a sort of test of there's something has to be done. Thank you very much. If you have questions, sayın katılımcılar, sorularınız varsa uygulama üzerinden
Distinguished participants, if you have questions, you can ask your questions through our applications. Our application, you can go to the schedule part, and then you can find our panel, and then write your questions there. Second speaker will be Marina Olshankya.
Really many thanks for the invitation to organizers. It's my pleasure to be back to Istanbul. I used to be a resident of the city once. And really great to see this kind of event happening in the discussion that we are having today. I think this is very timely and definitely a lot of challenges which many cities around the world are facing, which need to be brought up. I wanted to start by maybe explaining the topic that I chose for my comments today. And these are basically related to two important aspects. Each time when we talk about sustainable urban infrastructure, the issue of financing comes up, because this is something that always requires investment, and someone has to carry on the risk and the burden of those investments. And what we clearly see right now, that those needs for investment in urban infrastructure, they are increasing because of the many complexity and additional burdens or challenges that local authorities face across the world. We have observed the discussion today in the morning when all mayors were anonymous and saying that it's no longer the global goals that we have to fulfill, but the global goals. And each of those additional global goals carry on the needs for additional needs for investment in infrastructure, being it poverty, food security, migration, etc., etc. And that's also related not only to the needs for the new infrastructure, because cities are expanding, but also modernization of the existing infrastructure to make sure they are resilient to additional shocks that we are learning, to make sure they are more efficient and utilize the best available technologies. And all these additional needs and responsibilities comes with additional costs. Whereas when you look at the budgets of the local authorities, you won't see such a major expansion in budgets. Nowhere, neither in European Union nor in developing emerging countries. So there is clearly a disbalance between the needs that are there, and they're clear, and the capacities or abilities of the local authorities to actually finance those needs. And in that context, I think the role of private sector is not only the implementer, or subcontractor, but actually the one who comes on with investment and carries the risk of those investments is becoming, I think, more and more pronounced. And the issue is how to do it, because of course this is not something that even, again, has been the case a few years ago. But nevertheless, I feel from my experience, I'll talk about it a little bit later, that understanding how to get private sector on board to make sure, to help local authorities fill in those major gaps in financing is very important. Just, I wanted to say a few words about myself, why I'm here, and how do I know what I'm saying. Over the last 20 years, I've been working as an international technical advisor on climate change mitigation and sustainable energy. First with the United Nations Development Program, and later on as director of my own company. When doing so, I not only traveled the world, but I actually lived and experienced the real life and infrastructure of different cities around the world. I already mentioned that I've been living in Istanbul, I've been living in Moscow, in London, but also in smaller or medium-sized European cities such as Belgrade, Budapest, Bratislava, where I reside currently in such smallest one as Podgorica, I think one of the smallest capital of Europe. I actually moved to Istanbul from Podgorica. It was quite a shock for the whole family, I must admit. And kind of how surprisingly it can be, the challenges are exactly the same. Whether you talk to municipality in Turkey or municipality in Western Balkan. The key question is, okay, how do we go on and do all this, what is needed? So that was my role. I'm advising countries, government, international financial organization on how to design the projects, how to secure funding for that, and how to get this implemented. So let me give you a little bit of an overview, okay, where we stand globally on the different sources of funding which are available, or what the key trends are. And first of all, as regards climate finance, investment in climate, low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure, definitely there is a very upward trend that we are observing. And if you look globally, that again, this international organizations such as international financial institutions, IFI, MDBs, are the ones that are kind of at the forefront of the financing. This slide shows the quite steep rise in funding, which has been provided last year by NDBs around the globe. And this is understandable because usually this type of financial organizations, they come with very attractive financing terms on one side. So there's a long loans with a very low interest rate provided at very concessional terms. And of course, that makes them very suitable for the type of investment that needs to be done. The infrastructure is also something which doesn't make a quick return. But on the other side, when we look at, for example, what's happening in the European Union, that second graph, already in OECD countries, it's the private sector who is responsible, who's taking on the largest share of financing for climate. So it's already 63% in OECD countries that is being financed by private sector. So it means that the solutions are there, and there are private sector which understands basically how this kind of investment can be made for the benefit of the climate and for the benefit of the private sector, because eventually they're also looking for the profits there. So on the one side, what we also, of course, see that there is emergence of new group of climate leaders, so to say, which are cities and cities authorities. Again, that's not surprising because cities consume currently around 2/3 of the world's energy and they are responsible for the largest chunk of the greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at the various commitments that cities around the world has taken so far, you will see the total values of those commitments, obligations to reduce GHG emissions equals to the annual emissions of China, which is considerable. I would love to see at one stage more cities from Turkey on that list, and I hope that the event we are having today also will contribute. But again, what it means that there is, on one side, a supply of finance, and there is strong demand to do something. However, these modalities for private sector engagement and financing remains not very clear. I wanted to illustrate the work that is being done by the one project that I am still involved in, which is a joint project of the government of Kazakhstan, the United Nations, and the World Bank. And that's related to the establishment of a sustainable municipal infrastructure financing facility. And again, when we started this project, there was some assessment made for the main cities of Kazakhstan, Astana and Almaty, as regard, okay, how much money is needed to bring the buildings up to the standard in terms of earthquake resistance, to the standard in terms of energy performance in buildings, and the number they come up with was staggering. And they outpaced the availability of those municipalities to finance them. Basically, they would need another 50 years to do the work which needs to be done now, because earthquake can happen tomorrow and the energy is being invested today. So then, okay, the discussion started how we can bring private sector on board with investment to make these buildings and lighting system, whatever they have in the city, more sustainable, more efficient. That was actually the main purpose. And basically the facility has been set up, which, like these big banks, provide concessional financing, cheap loans to the local companies to undertake this kind of investment. And when I think in Turkey that would also be applicable, this kind of instrument, because otherwise the cost of financing very high for private sector. And when you really reduce it to the level of below inflation rate, there is a queue in actually private sector companies who want to take this loan and do something which is good for the city and good for them. So in the case of Kazakhstan, the sectors that have been targeted is public buildings and lighting system, water supply, sanitation, and even transport. And so what is important here is really the change kind of in the role of the the government, the municipality. So in the classic situation, you would only have the upper box and the lower boxes. The municipality provide financing to the public facility to do certain works. But as I said, it would take 50 years to cover all the needs. But when you engage second-tier banks, those who actually provide the key loans, the type of ESCO company, the private sector who invest and then get and make the sort of the carries the risk, you actually do it faster. It requires less money for a municipality because it's all loans, they're getting back, they're revolving kind of, and the whole facility is expanding. And you create a new type of market, and I heard this morning in the plenary very nice wording, the cities are actually creating values. Because through this scheme you also create new jobs, you're not only doing the emissions reductions, but you really create new opportunities for the local economy, for the local companies to earn money and to develop. And so this is just one of the examples. I didn't have that much time, but I think it's something that definitely to think about in terms of this funding gap problems. Some of the challenges that have been faced when designing this kind of instrument is, first of all, of course, how to define sustainable infrastructure, which kind of project is actually efficient and not efficient, and it's related to the issue of data, what's the baseline energy use afterwards. So there are some technical challenges to be overcome for sure. There's also the issue of structuring these public-private contracts, because usually it's some types of PPP arrangement, and of course, depending on the legal context of specific countries, it's all not easy. It's not that many avenues for private sector to engage directly with public sector. It's either procurement or PPP, and you have to know, of course, how to work it out, and it's really costly for small projects, and that's why this kind of bundling concept is also very important. But again, this is a technical problem which can be overcome. But I've also learned that really this involvement of financial institutions, the local banks, is critical. You know, they are the ones who finance the economy. They also have to understand what is sustainable infrastructure, what it means, how these projects can earn for themselves, and it requires a lot of education also. The financial sector is very risk averse. They would listen to all of this climate change, but as far as kind of giving loans, they have to be triple time convinced before they actually will give you the check. And yeah, again, related to the data issue, monitoring and measuring, both financial and environmental impact of this project, important both, again, to convince the banks, look, this is really something is paying off. It is also to convince the people that are investing in infrastructure which is becoming better, more sustainable. And the last point is, again, to change the kind of thinking of the local authorities. They're not the ones who are responsible for all infrastructure, but their role is maybe also to create space for others to help to come in with their technologies, with their investment. And this is, I think, something also that is happening right now as we're having this discussion during the forum. I'm almost on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Marina. You give us and provide us quite executive insight about the role of private sector. Because as far as in Istanbul, we have also observing a lot about almost all investments, even though they're made by public, they are privately driven. So it will be very useful to understand the mechanics, dynamics, case studies, but also linking with Matthias' framework about what makes sense. And these are the key points, and you identify how the banks are perceiving the process, the uncertainty points, and some lessons learned we can take as a sort of advice for the urban professionals, urban managers. And yeah, thank you very much for really useful and nice presentation. Şimdi ise Olga Shapelinskaya dinleyelim.
We'll listen to Olga Shapelinsky. She's coming from India. We're very curious about her presentation. Yes, the floor is yours, Olga.
Everyone, and I'd like to thank very much the organizers for having me here, for this opportunity to share my thoughts and to learn from other participants being here. So, as we know, cities across the world are growing very fast. It's really the right time for us to ask ourselves, how exactly do we want our cities to grow? How do we want them to look like, to feel like in the future? And this comes to actually thinking about how do we reconcile the needs of, on one hand, to build fast and affordable, because people move to cities and they need infrastructure, with, on the other hand, the needs of building sustainable and livable, because this is no longer a question of a choice. So these are the considerations I'd like to dwell into a little bit. So today we essentially have two major urban development scenarios. One of them is like this. It's commercially mass-produced buildings, using commercially mass-produced building materials, design, which create quite homogeneous cities. Can anyone tell me what this city is? Any guess? Everywhere? Any other name for the city? Any try? This is not Istanbul, this is not China, this is Sao Paulo in Brazil, the financial capital of Brazil. Let's try another one. What about this one? Any idea? Not same, but okay, I give you a hint, it's in Africa. If it can help? Yes? Okay, okay, we are getting closer. Yes, indeed, this is Johannesburg. And last one, what about this one? Okay, very good. Very good. Sometimes people don't guess, but yes, this is Istanbul. So this is pretty much what we see. It's quite hard to make a difference despite cities are located on different continents of the world. Now there is a second very niche urban development scenario, which I would subdivide in two categories. One is pretty much historical cities, historical parts of cities, historic cores, which by definition were built in line with the local context, because essentially they were built pre-industrial revolution, so very much caring about the natural conditions just for the matter of survival. These are less than 1% of the urban fabric in most cities, and usually not well maintained, very often encroached upon, and rarely revitalized, but revitalization is coming into the picture. The second subset is very interesting. These are niche solutions of building alternatively today, not with mass materials, but usually with local materials tailored to the local context, such as this Filipino house built with low-cost bamboo, local bamboo. What is the problem of this kind of urban development? The only problem with it is that it's very niche. Usually it requires technical expertise, sensitivity of the architect, of the urban designer. It requires more time than what usually we take to build infrastructure. So basically it's not upscalable. It's very right in its approach, but it's not upscalable. So basically we face this dilemma, that we need to reconcile the two needs, building fast and affordable and building livable and sustainable. Why so? So looking at this map of urbanization in the world, we very clearly see that Asia and Africa is urbanizing very rapidly even today. So Latin America is already 80% urbanized, and it's going to be urbanized by 90%, but it's pretty much saturated. But in Asia, if you look here, urbanization is booming. Same goes for Africa. And now narrowing down to Turkey a little bit, so Turkey is a very interesting case because it's one of those non-Asian, non-African countries that urbanize extremely fast, faster than China and faster than India. Not only big cities such as Istanbul, Izmir, Ankara, but secondary cities are urbanizing very fast, are growing very fast, as per the World Bank. So this is very much the right country to ask ourselves, how exactly do we want to urbanize? At the same time, if you look at the statistics of the World Bank, so between now and 2040, we'll need to spend almost $100 trillion on infrastructure. And another interesting point, 60% of the infrastructure we'll see in just 10 years, by 2030, is yet to be built. So this means we live in a critical decade, the decisions of which are going to influence how we're going to live in city for decades afterwards. So this rapid urbanization is accompanied by all these challenges that I'm sure you're very familiar with. For example, Chennai floods. I'm sure you hear sometimes in the news, Chennai is extremely flooded. That is because over the last 40 years, over 90% of water bodies of Chennai have been encroached upon. So water has nowhere to go and it floods the city. The reverse side of the medal is droughts, because again, we are not maintaining the blue ecosystems. There is no water to provide for our needs. As was rightly said, we have to bring water sometimes 300 kilometers away from the city. Traffic. So in Asia, about 20% of the city's surface is covered by roads. If you think about it, it's a lot that could be converted partially into public spaces, into green areas. We're using them for roads for this, to use private cars essentially. And now the question of affordable housing. So that is very interesting. We say that we need to build affordable, but does building affordable necessarily mean this? So this is a project made in Ankara in the 90s. Affordable housing, yes, price-wise, but is this socially right to put people in such an environment where there is no greenery, there is no public space? Is it a livable environment? Is it at all acceptable to reach such levels of life? So this is a question we have to ask ourselves when we take infrastructure decisions. Now, the challenge of unsustainable building is further exacerbated by climate change. So here we see the world risk indexes as per countries. Again, Asia and Africa are highly vulnerable. If you look at Turkey, it's low risk, you can say. But at the same time, if we continue emitting greenhouse gases as much as we do, business as usual, then the mean surface temperature in Turkey is likely to increase by 7% by 2100, which means 40% less precipitation. So again, the country is quite affected. So what does it mean? It means that the consequences of building uniform go much beyond the cultural loss. And I'll give you two examples. Coming to climate adaptation. So Jakarta is a city located on the ocean side, and 40% of the city is sinking now. Why is it sinking? Because 97% of the city is covered by concrete and asphalt. On one hand. On the other hand, we continue building high rises, hence completely destroying the groundwater system. And there is subsidence, and then these buildings again are going down. The government of Indonesia has already announced that it's moving its capital to another island. So is this where we want to reach? And this is man-made disaster, this is not natural disaster. Coming to climate mitigation. Again, here a very interesting point. You know, when we talk about energy efficiency in buildings, what we actually usually mean is energy efficient buildings once they are built. But actually, if you look at the whole cycle of how you produce a building, so you start with resource extraction, then you manufacture the building materials, you bring them to the site, you have to maintain the building after it's built, you demolish it eventually, and then you have to dispose of the waste. So interestingly, if you look only at this one section, manufacturing, of the conventional building materials, so cement, glass, steel, aluminium, only that manufacturing part is responsible for 25% of global energy demand and 20% of global CO2 emissions. So this means unless we tackle the way we build, there is no way we can meet the Paris Agreement and remain under the 2 degrees rise by 2100. So what to do? We need alternative solutions. So either we live in such environments or we live in more livable environments. At Unicity, we created an international working group called Third Way of Building Cities. So Unicity as a consultancy, we work on sustainable urban development, and our approach is very local context tailored, in which we bring out the unique socioeconomic and environmental value of each city. We also do research, cutting-edge research, looking, for example, into how digital technologies help heritage revival and so on. So we took a lead in creating this group where we brainstorm on how we can build alternatively. And I'll share 3 quick insights with you on this. So the overarching principle is what we need to do is to always seek local context-tailored solutions and upscale them with new technologies. New technologies allow us to do better, to do faster than we used to do in heritage times, but at the same time harness on the local context. So 3 points. First one, what kind of alternative building materials can we get that could be made faster and cost effectively, but then also be local context tailored? So a number of solutions are already there. For example, in Canada and in the United States, more and more look into massive wood constructions. It's already been proven that you can build a high-rise with wood materials. So this is a 7-story house in Minneapolis. Here, there is another technique used, I'll just detail it, and prefabricated modular house, again, based on natural materials. So let's look a little bit at this technique called compressed stabilized earth blocks. So you're all familiar with bricks, I'm sure. So here, you actually do blocks, but you don't burn them, which allows you to save up to 10 times the energy consumption. So what you do, you dig soil from the very place where you need to put foundations of your house. It doesn't work everywhere, it depends on the quality of the soil, but it works on many occasions. And you use it as a building material. So that's very interesting, it's very sustainable, you don't need to transport anything from anywhere. So there is a certain mix with a bit of cement, it's usually 3 to 10%, which is much less when you just pour cement and concrete. And it's very localized, because you just use the material on the spot. And so it creates very interesting houses such as this, for example, which was done in Bangalore. And believe it or not, this is affordable housing. It's very livable, it's green, it's been done by a very sensitive architect, Jayakumar Sonam, in collaboration with Good Earth, which is again a very kind of environment-sensitive constructor, and it leads to beautiful outcomes. So it's possible when there is a will. Second point, alternative urban development models. So here again, while we can build high-rise with concrete, steel, and glass, it's not possible with all materials. But do we actually need it or not? You know, we did an assessment for Asia, and 60% of urban dwellers in Asia actually live in small and medium-sized cities. So is this even aspirational to live in uniform high-rises? This is not so much the case. So, for example, one of the models that would allow us to build with alternative materials is called high-density low-rise. If you look at Jaisalmer, which is a historical city in Rajasthan in India, that's pretty much how that was built. Dense, populated, low-rise, and very local context tailored, in which you would see these narrow streets. So that's Rajasthan is an arid, hot climate. Here, see how much shade you get just by the way streets are built, the ventilation, so that it allows for natural cooling, rooftops, which are used by people at night. And here is an application of what we can do today with the same learnings. So Raj Rival is a very famous Indian architect, and for the Asian Games in 1980s, he created this Asian village, where basically he used the Jaisalmer pattern of narrow streets, shading, cross-ventilation, and which now is considered one of the most prestigious areas in Delhi to live in. So again, a possibility of doing things today in an effective manner. And finally, alternative policies and regulations. So I was just before this one on Istanbul. It was extremely interesting and insightful. And there was a debate on how do we deal with constructors who are not sensitive to the identity of the city and build just uniform buildings. So my belief is that regulations today are quite important. Yes, we need to give space for creativity, but this creativity doesn't always have in mind the public good. So look, for example, at this picture. So someone is walking there, and I think the mic is gone. Or not? Yes, it's back. So look, this person is walking. Facade is closed. There is nothing he can look at. No shading. Some cars are passing by. There is no connect with the space. And now look at the alternative. So here some shading, open facade, so maybe it's a cafe, maybe it's a bookshop. Greenery, there is a kind of a barrier of trees between the road and the pedestrian path. The other side of the street is activated as well. And all of this can be achieved with regulations. So in fact, in the US, some architects and in fact some decision makers as well have come up with this concept of form-based codes. So usually when we regulate a city, we typically would do zoning. So we would say here is a commercial zone, here is a residential zone, here maybe is a mixed-use zone. But this doesn't help us decide what kind of buildings we are going to see in the city, what kind of public spaces we are going to get. So form-based codes allowed you to do precisely that. And to give you another example, in Singapore, they have what they call guidelines for different areas of the city. So first of all, the guidelines feature the identity of that neighborhood. And second, they provide for public comfort. So if you're a builder in Singapore, you cannot just build anything. You have to provide shading, you have to provide open facade, you have to provide a facade that will match well with the rest of the street. You have to provide a roof that will match well with the roofscape of that area. And very interestingly, these guidelines say if you don't comply with the guidelines, but you believe your project is unique, we still want to see it. So there is this entry for creativity, but at the same time, the government doesn't allow identity to just disappear. So thank you very much. I hope that this generated a bit of interest, and we look forward to working together with you.
Olga, thank you very much. It was a very exciting presentation. And you let us focus on the smallest units, the building materials, and in order to link with these concepts of sustainability and resilience. And it was very useful for us, actually, for the examples and case studies. The concepts, what Matthias started, Marina continued, now it's visualized and we see good, bad, big, small, different examples. Thank you very much. Arkadaşlar bilgisayarı değiştirmemiz gerekiyor. Değiştirdik mi acaba?
We have to change the computer. Have you changed the slides for the last panelist? Now we're going to continue with the next speaker, Argyris.
Sitting there for far too long, and that's not me really. Oh, excuse me if I'm slow. So this is a fancy title, and I just wanted to impress you, but don't worry about it. What this presentation will aim to do to you is to realize that the buildings need to be part of the infrastructure, because we often think about infrastructure and we talk about water, we talk about transport, but and housing, of course, but we don't realize that the buildings have the ability to give back to us as much as they take from us every day. So here we go. I would please ask you to use your mobile phones and help me make this interactive. Please log on to the web.me2.com. I'd like to see you using your phones and logging in and using the IT, because I'm going to ask you some questions. Because end of the day, if you don't learn anything from me, I would like to learn something from you. At the far right corner at the bottom, you'll have the website and the ID for the next few slides. So please log in. I've got some questions for you, and I'm really hoping you can answer them.
Sorry, may I also translate that? Bu panelde de özel bir oturum olacak. This is the website.
So if you just go on your browser, just go on your browser and type in
web.me.com'a giriyoruz.
And it's going to ask you for this number, and you put 188971.
Toplantı numarası diye soracak. Arkada 188 971 695'i girerekten bu toplantının session'ına bağlanabileceğiz.
And I have to say, I've tried this before and it didn't work. So let's see if it's going to work this time. So it's not enough, you just go to your browser, you go to Chrome or Mozilla or whatever you got on your phone, and you type this on your URL.
Yani aplikasyon
the
üzerinden de
address.
değil, normal bir web sitesi sayfasında web.meto.com'u
If it doesn't work, I've got an alternative. I've got a plan B. Don't worry about it. Move on? Yeah, move on. Sure? It's going to be there. Move on. So, why is this happening to me?
You want to go to the beginning?
Yeah.
Just push one. It takes maybe some time.
No, it's going back. Can we fix this maybe, or because this is not working anymore?
You need to press slow, like one and wait.
Maybe not.
Mesela bas şu an. Yes. See guys.
It's going to happen. You understand, this way we're going to end up. If we go this way, we're going to end up being here all night. So. Right. Could you, if I just let you know when to press, and then you press the click. You have to go way back. I do apologize. I did say last time it didn't work, but that was not the problem last time. Now we got a different problem. And I can. You let me know if I can just talk through, or if we're gonna sort it out.
Oradan manuel açabilir misiniz? Şimdi çalışıyor mu? Manuel olarak yapabilirsiniz, zamanı kaybetmeyelim çünkü katılımcılarımız da zamanı kıymetli, misafirlerimiz de zamanı kıymetli.
Sure. This is just what I'm going to be talking about the next, I hope, 15 minutes. You allow me the time. I'll quickly shoot you a slide where I'm from, and I'll talk about some history facts, and then I'll tell you what urban building energy modeling is, and I'll talk about the research that we did at Loughborough University. Almost. Here you go. Next slide. Oh, perfecto. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Big thanks to the tech guys, and my apologies, probably it's my fault. So, there's a map that says my grandparents came from Istanbul, from my mother's side, and from my father's side came from Izmir. They settled in Thessaloniki in Greece. Many years later, I was born, and in 2001, I flew to the UK, and I never came back. And I've been working and studying in the UK since then, and I've worked for the private sector, for non-government companies, for the government, and now I work in the university. And I'm going to take you about 50 years back, give or take. And we're going to see, and you're going to tell me what you think was the most important thing that happened in the 70s. Because there are some things that happened that really fascinate me, and I think they're deep down in your memories as well. One of the first things that happened in the 70s was disco music. And I personally love disco music. I don't know if that's your thing, but disco music in the 70s boomed, and all sorts of hell broke loose since then. Another thing that's very dear to my heart is the Star Wars movies that happened in the 70s, and loads of technology and visuals came out from these things. And another favorite of mine, and I do apologize, is all about me, these slides. It's the Pink Panther in the 70s. It's my absolutely favorite cartoon ever. And Inspector Clouseau, clumsy, horrible fashion, absolutely horrible fashion in the 70s. Yeah, I don't know if you grew up in the 70s and you liked these things, but I was born in the 80s and we hated this stuff and we still do, and I hope this never comes back. An important breakthrough was the floppy disk storage space, and whatever that means for data storage these days. Of course, the first email was sent in the 70s, and whatever that has done to our communications. I don't know if the next slide will help. Let's all pray that it's going to help. So, there's a question for you, yeah? What is the most important thing that happened in the 70s? And if you go inside your app, you would be able to vote. And if I get very few votes, I'm going to make you stand up and tell me what it is. So, voting is open. So you can go on your apps, you can go to the website and put the ID and let me know if any of these things made sense to you, if they're dear to your heart, or if there's anything else that you think was a breakthrough. Oh, we got 35 responses and climbing, 41, let's go, 53, 43, 44. I'll stop it here, yeah? Good. And it should work and tell us what you think. It was amazing. Email was amazing. And the Star Wars movie, and nobody liked the Pink Panther, it's fine. And that's all fine, you know. These are things that will stay with us forever, I would like to think, especially the technologies and the email. I can't see how we're going to get out of this thing. For me, the most important thing that happened in the 70s in my job and what made me who I am is the energy oil crisis, or what we know now, it's a perception of crisis, because really the production of oil never stopped and it kept rising forever, and we still see that it's still there and we use it, and some people just don't let us break through. But the most amazing thing that happened after that is the amount of research and science that came from this energy so-called crisis. One of the things that mattered to my field, it's the establishment of the US Department of Energy in 1997, and that really, they really allowed a lot of funding to go into the research. And some of the first documents that we have are from Princeton University, where loads of interesting things happened in the late, rather, 70s. And where they established, I don't know if you can read some of these papers, they're just photos of the papers that I have, they're super interesting. It's probably some of the first papers that they mention regional energy use and modeling energy use, because it was of a real interest to try to, if you like, predict the next crisis. Of course, that was not a crisis, so we never got another one in terms of energy, and hopefully we're not going to get another one. So that's there in the 70s, where the energy, the urban, the modeling, all these things, all these terminologies, all this scientific research comes up, and it's a really key point. And now we jump 30, 50 years later, we got another crisis, and it's an even bigger one. I didn't really follow what happened in Istanbul, if you had big marches or not. But in many parts of the world, now they start to understand these graphs on the right-hand side, where we've got the greenhouse gases, how they've been growing the last 50 years, the last 200 years, the last 500,000 years, and why we are where we are at the moment. But then we've got, the people are rising, the people are understanding, and they care about these things, and that's really, really hopeful. But I'm not here to talk about that. What I'm here to talk about is what that means for us, really. So the energy crisis, it's absolutely related to the urbanization of the world. And as we go, right now we've got 50% of the population living in cities. By 2050, the predictions are up to 70% of the global population would live in cities. And I'm glad we've got the same figures with Marina or Olga. 70% of the resources are spent and used in the cities. And out of the 70%, 40%, it's a big percentage, is in buildings. And of course, what do we do in buildings? We stay in there, we have to keep warm and cool, so we use it for heating and cooling mostly. And the predictions over the next not many years, I mean 2050 is not that far away anymore, is that cooling demand will rise by 3 times. And that's really down to us moving into the cities. And whatever that does to the climate, whatever that does to the infrastructure, we have to start understanding how these things work in a global scale and in an urban scale specifically. So that's why I'm interested in the urban building energy modeling. And that's why I think I'm probably pass this on to you. What is urban building energy modeling? It really is what it says, all right? It's modeling, understanding the energy use on an urban scale, the energy use of buildings. And how do we do that? Mainly we measure and we monitor what is used in buildings. And why do we want to do that? We want to reduce the energy demand. However, it hasn't been as easy the past few years with all the technology that we have to reduce this energy demand. So now we have a new concept. We have to control the demand, what is called the demand side response. So we have to shift our use of energy, or we have to reduce and use it another time, another day. And this is also called flexibility in the demand. And how do we do urban building energy modeling? I don't want to bore you with all this academic stuff. We've got the top-down models, we've got the bottom-up models. Obviously, the top-down, they look at the city as an entity and they drill down to the details. They're interested policymakers are very interested in these things, but they've got huge uncertainties, of course. And then we've got the bottom-up models where we go from a building and we extrapolate to the city. And for that, we need loads of data. Data, remember that word, data, it's ruined my life. And they've got negatives and positives as anything else, but nowadays we understand that the bottom-up models are more accurate, and as we get more and more data-driven models, they get better. And this is just a graph that sort of shows how the accuracy has improved since the 70s of these models and how the models have changed. Now we are looking at this hybrid at the far top right end of the graph. We look at these hybrid models where we've got physical models that are built with loads of information about the envelope and the thermal properties of the building, but also with loads of information coming from the use, the energy, the data that these buildings generate. Lots of different tools. GIS, AutoCAD for design, building, GIS for the city, for planning. We've got this new Modelica Energy Blast. They drill down to the specific heating and ventilation systems, and they try to manage them more efficiently. What we're lacking is to have specific operation on a larger scale. And this is where loads of research is happening right now. This is where my research is focusing at the moment. Where do we use these models? We've used them in the past for energy efficiency. We've used them to integrate renewables in our cities, but now where we use them is to control the demand. So that demand side response is a very, very important part of the future. What is demand side response? I'm just going to read you out the words. It's when the energy use is, the users are provided with incentives to change their behavior, really, to shift their demand, either in terms of days or in terms of kilowatt hours. And how do we do that? We play with the lighting, we play with the fridges, we play with whatever it's in the house or in the commercial space, and who participates? It could be us in homes, it could be people in commercial buildings, it could be huge freezers in the supermarkets where we can switch them off for a minute, and that saves a whole lot of energy, but it doesn't really reduce the quality of the product. And what really flexibility, what it does, it balances the supply and the demand, where the problem is as we keep moving into the cities and increasing our energy use by buying clothes and moving further away and taking flights and eating strange foods. But buildings, and that's the real point, they are no longer just part of an infrastructure. They can be an active player because they've got an inherent capability to store heat and energy and then bring in and release it later in the day or later in the week. Of course, the challenge is to minimize energy, but also not have any negative impact on our comfort and on our business, everyday business. In the UK, there's loads of billions that can be saved if we do the flexible part in the demand. Research at Loughborough University, right in the middle of England, in the bottom part of the UK. On the right-hand side, this is where we work, this is what we use. There's about 70 or odd groups of buildings. It's about a couple of hundred buildings in there. It's one of the largest campus in the UK. It's called buildings of all sorts, really old buildings from the 30s and really new buildings from like last year, with all sorts of shapes and signs and uses, and it's like a micro city, if you like, which is an interesting part. And there's loads of data coming out of it. We've got 35,000 points measuring actively right now. We get data every hour, every half an hour, every 15 minutes, or every second. There's loads of data. There's absolutely loads of data. And I have to make sense of it, so it's a bit painful. How do we model these buildings? There's 70 buildings. If we were to apply this on an urban scale, it might be 70,000 buildings. So how do we automate a model? How do we automate the generation of the model when the drawings are from the 50s, or even they don't exist, or when the drawings are really, really refined and very, very new? So we are at a stage where we're gathering this data and we have to start generating models. And it takes days to generate a model for one building, and it has to take seconds. So how do you do that? I have to find out. One of the ways that we're using now, we're using these schemas, that what they're called. So these are templates, if you like, that we can store all this information, and they inherently have information about the relationships of all this data inside. And these things can be there forever if we are successful in generating automated, really good data. This can be used not only for bringing down the energy demand of the campus and have it transferred to the city or wherever, but this also can be used for education in the next few years. So now, I would like to know, may I please know, how advanced do you think this flexibility, the demand-side response, is in Turkey? And the poll is open, so you can vote, and you can tell me, yes, we understand the concept, we are doing it, no, we're not, or we're not interested. What the hell are you talking about? I've got a number. I can't see the number. Can you see the number? 12 out of 35, 14, going up. Let's go to 20. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much for participating. I'll close it and we'll see the results right now. So Turkey is not as much advanced in the demand side response. So there's a discussion there, there's a discussion point. And the next point is, if you were to use this here or in any place in the world, if you think demand side response is an important concept and it should be used, what should it be used for? Should it be used primarily to fight this climate crisis? Should it be used to secure the supply of a nation, to provide income to us, to be fair to the population that doesn't have that much to spend on energy, to fix the prices so everybody can get something out of it, to provide funding for retrofitting scale and being more energy efficient in our stock, or any other reason, or whether you should think, it's rubbish, man, I don't want to use that thing. So the poll is yours. And I promise that's the last one, that's the last vote. Can we go past 40? Yay! 32, 4, 5, 6, 7. Great, thank you so much. So this is what we think. We need to fight climate. That is an amazing message that you give out to the world. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was so exciting as like the other panelists. I don't know. Everybody says very interesting things. Thank you very much for the interactivity and also bring us from past to now. You focus on the energy building model, and you provide us quite comprehensive scientific and technical advancements, modeling, but in order to link us with the real life and real issues. I think when Matthias was talking about digitalization, you give a perfect example of the energy in terms of buildings. And once again, what I found very exciting is we were discussing about this issue, university as a case study for energy modeling. I mean, that will be one of the one of the unique cases in the world. There are some. Thank you very much for the panel. Sayın katılımcılarımız, umarım biraz hoş.
Distinguished participants, I hope you enjoyed the presentations. As Matthias said, this is not blah blah blah what we're talking. These are real life issues, and it was very informative for me. I hope it was the same for you. I have received various questions from you so far. Okay. Now, I would like to ask a few of those questions. Matthias, first of all.
While you're talking about green infrastructure, apart from the existing and structured green areas, what do you mean by organization like governing the green infrastructure? Are you talking about the existing infrastructure? As far as I understand, yes. But what's the point? One of the participants wants clarification.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the question. You know, there is existing green in the city, which is typically being encroached or destroyed or, you know. So I think the first step would be to somehow preserve this, or if you have to build on it, you know, compensate or something like this. But there is a lot that can be, I mean, I'm looking at green infrastructures as a function. We're not talking about beautification of the city, you know, and we're talking about something that has a function for cooling. Something that has a function for purifying air pollution, and the management is absolutely essential because different species have different, more cooling or less cooling. They can take these and it's not just air, soil purification, water purification. So those are all these functions. Then there are additional functions like biodiversity and things like that. So basically you have to think about you see, I think we still have a very old-fashioned view. We think green is opposed to the city, you know? And I think there are many opportunities to build green into the city. I think you had nice pictures. I mean, what is the problem of putting a tree there? You can do a roof or you can do a tree, okay? And both need to be maintained. I think I like your point on finance, you know, because a tree in a city lives about 1/3 of the life it lives in the countryside. So you have to do something with it. You can do green facades, you can do you can do green roofs. And, you know, I'm not talking about environmental protection. I'm just talking about the function of making the city more sustainable. That's it. And we have to, now there's a little problem. You don't make money with green, okay? You make money with energy, you make money with, but increasingly, I think builders see the value of green infrastructure. People see the value of, if you have good trees in the city, you spend less money on, you know, I don't know, shelters or things like that. So I think it becomes part of the managing of the urban city. For me, it's like digitalization. It's a transversal thing in everything you do, in the energy you produce, in the water, in the buildings, even in the streets, in the roads. I mean, why? You can, for example, urban trains, you can put a lot of green stuff in between. You don't need to concrete things, you know. So I think there is, parkings can be vegetalized. I mean, the only point I want to make is that you have to put that somehow into the urban infrastructure systems. Not because we like it, because it's green is more beautiful, but simply because it has a function in the entire system.
Yeah. Eğer anlaşıldı mı bilmiyorum ama mevcut yapılar...
I don't think if it was clear, but what was said was that green areas should be considered as real infrastructure and we should manage them as it is.
Online GIS for each trees in the city. Second example, Bryant Park, I guess. They get more rent of the offices who were looking at the park comparing to the other ones.
Of course.
Real estate value. I mean, these are some examples, but it can be quantified in the future and can be translated into the financial means. Thank you very much.
I certainly don't want to appear romantic. This is not about romanticism. This is a need for making cities work.
İkinci sorumuz yine şimdi baktık. Marina. We know that when private sector involved in infrastructure, making profit becomes prominent. In that case, the cost to access and use this infrastructure get higher. Then how could we define sustainability in public-private partnerships?
Very good question, thank you.
Very hard question.
Very good question. Well, I think there can be different PPPs for sure. And in some cases, there is an issue of eventual people or residents of the city paying higher prices, in which case, I guess there should be visible improvement in the quality of the service. But there are cases also, which I think we used to call low-hanging fruit, which actually will bring prices down. That everything as regards investment in energy efficiency brings the ultimate bill lower for the city, yeah? And in that case, I've been involved, only the PPP can be structured in such a way that it's being paid off not from the additional fees, but from the savings that are being achieved as a result of this investment. And these are, I think, first and foremost, the type of kind of investment that the municipality should promote, because it is not linked to the increase in the tariffs, but you basically eliminate the waste that you're currently having. Yeah. So definitely I agree this is the point. I think maybe for the transport sector that would be applicable, but again, in that case you would definitely expect a certain improvement in quality, and that would justify higher tariff. But definitely there are a PPP project which are not linked to the increase in tariffs. And then
I have an additional question based on this question. Do you think so? What I really tell about demand side, does customers make difference in terms of their users, ICT awareness? I don't know. I'm not sure, but as a feeling, what do you feel?
Well, I think the example that we've been shown today, this is a perfect example of where the things are heading. Yeah, it's a matter of actually being able to operationalize this approach. You know, first digitalization should take place, yeah, and then the policies set up this financial incentive so that we use the opportunity that this digitalization gives us to again optimize the use of resources in the system, and of course this is something that is definitely, I think, the way forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Üçüncü sorumuz.
Third question. We will see it now on the screen. The question is for Olga.
such as wooden buildings, how we will save or conserve the forest while trying to find new solutions? Won't it create the new problems? We can have this example, but can generate to any kind of intersectoral phenomena. While you are doing tourism, you are doing something. While you're doing something, it could affect.
Okay, thank you very much. That's indeed a valid question. So in fact, when I worked with people working on massive wood production, they very much look into this. So as to my knowledge, as of now, wood constructions essentially happen in Canada and then now increasingly in the US. So Canada, as you know, is a large country with low density, which has a lot of forests. So the idea is that you have to replenish the forest, and these are specific types of wood which you can use effectively for construction, that also for the selection of which one of the criteria is how fast these trees can grow. So I don't know the whole set of details on that, but the idea is that you replenish the forest as per the needs of the construction. So now, very accurately you mentioned, what is valid for Canada may not necessarily be for other countries. So in the international working group that we set, and we essentially focus on Asia in the first stage, we are going to look into what kinds of woods possibly could be utilized in different Asian subregions. And this research needs to be done because you cannot just go into it. That's why also I mentioned that these alternative materials, they actually require a lot of work from our side. So we, for example, at Unicity work on different topics. One of them is reviving natural ecosystems, as was just said, that you need to replenish them. So here it is pretty straightforward. We have a good set of evidence that by reviving natural ecosystems you can improve the city's conditions. With alternative building materials, we are not at this stage yet. We are still at the research stage, where there are some breakthroughs, and I try to share a couple of them, but it requires more research on how can we mainstream and upscale. So that's exactly what we are doing in this working group. But there is potential. For example, coming back to wood, China now has initiated massive research on how to use wood in the Chinese context. And that's exactly what we need to do before we go to the next level, which is how to mainstream the newly found solutions through policies and regulations.
Thank you very much. There's one question, but there are too many questions. I cannot ask all of them. I will ask one more question to our last panelists are here. How we could transform this model to the third world countries rather than the first world, or this demand side. We know that UK is relatively high standards on data and other aspects. Culturally, daily life is different from the other countries, but if you take into account the rest of the world, are you optimistic, or what are your perspectives?
Optimistic is not the word I would use for anything right now. So that's a great question, because I always thought that the developing world has got so much to learn from the developed world. And maybe they can skip some parts because we've done things in the developed world that we know they're rubbish, or we didn't do them great, and then they can skip some sort of bad routes that we've taken and go straight to the point. But I would definitely say, the demand-side response requires data and technology. So if these things are not in place, it's not the easiest thing to implement. And I think, and these people next to me would probably have more to say on that, the developing world can do other things that they haven't done, such as updating and upgrading the fabric of their buildings. That could be so much more effective than demand-side response. Because before you do demand-side response, as you do with recycling, the first thing is to reduce. So first you reduce.
Then recycling.
And then, if you cannot reduce anymore, you can start being flexible with the demand. So I would say the developing world would benefit from looking at more solid examples of things that have worked already in the developed world.
But what about, I have a question based on that. By introducing sensors or new data collection,
Yeah.
and we are aware of that, the new technologies are also highly adapted by or adopted by the developing countries. Surprisingly, Brasilia or I don't know India, they are massive users, and of course things are different.
Yeah.
They could skip some aspect, but this rhetoric of this, I don't know. If such a country in Africa, for instance, goes for really good data collecting, at the same time high engagement of digitalization, do they can apply this demand side? Is it enough for that? Or
I wouldn't say they cannot. One of the things that these countries can benefit from is that the technology in the sensors, in the monitoring, has developed so rapidly, and they're so cheap now. Now you can instantly go in a house and put up whatever sensors you can and you want, and measure everything and anything. The demand side response requires companies to get involved and mixed use buildings to get involved. There's some developments in the UK that they do like peer-to-peer exchange of energy in homes. But of course, you probably agree with me that the amount of storage and capability of a big supermarket in terms of electricity, because they've got huge fridges, doesn't even compare to a single house. So we could say that hundreds of houses, if linked to a supermarket, they could start playing with each other in terms of their demand. So it's not really about the developing or the developed as such, and I will bring in the governments and the participation. It's more about including more uses in it. And one of the things that the developing world can take is all the bad things that we've done. They shouldn't be doing the same mistakes, I would say. I don't know if any,
Yeah, Olga.
If I may add, Ulas, on what Argelis, what you've highlighted very rightly is that we need to start, and it's not mutually excluding, but we need to start with looking at how we build. So I'll give you a typical example in India. So interestingly, in India, and that's the case in many developing Asian countries, what people see as aspirational is basically concrete boxes. So let's say if someone in India in a small city lives in a mud house. So we did research on the city of Chanderi, which is a city of weavers, handloom weavers. So traditionally they have these mud houses which allow for the loom to be installed and which has natural ventilation. So despite quite extreme conditions, it gets quite hot and in summers at some point, they get a temperature which they're comfortable with. And these houses sometimes are 300 years old. In fact, it's a historical city, which some organizations try to preserve. Now these people, obviously they are not officially protected, these houses. As soon as they get some money, they want to build a concrete box for themselves. And they demolish the 300-year-old house. But so the problem is elsewhere. So once they have the concrete box, suddenly they need air conditioning, which they cannot afford because they have quite modest lifestyle. So there we get into an issue which we could have expected, but we didn't expect. And I think people need to be informed enough that certain ways of building actually are not going to improve their lifestyle, but are going to worsen it. So once you're informed, then you can make better decisions. I'm not saying that today we should all live in mud houses, but the intermediate solutions, exactly with compressed stabilized earth blocks that we've been looking at, that can be quite affordable in local areas. So we need to start with that and then manage the demand, but starting with what exactly we supply in the housing sector.
Yes, please, Magna.
I just wanted to comment on this question whether energy and data management is needed or feasible in the context of developing countries. I mean, I think this is not really a question. It just has to be done. It's like a normal good housekeeping, you know, with your family, you know how much money you spend on energy, I'm pretty sure. But I've met myself in my life so many city managers who had no clue how much they spent on energy every year. And when they find eventually and look at the numbers, they're shocked. Yeah, because they said, oh really, you know, it's like half of our operational budget each year goes electricity, gas, coal, whatever. And so this digitalization technology actually enables us to do this faster and more efficient. I've been working in Croatia 10 years ago. We introduced this energy management system there, and basically how it works that there was Excel table and there was energy manager appointed in each public buildings and then cities, and already cumbersome. Right now you have these sensors, remote reading, and you collect this data and you overflown with this data actually, but that's what gives you actually as a mayor, as a city authority picture. Okay, these are the 100 buildings I have, and for some reason in this building I have that level of consumption, and the same building I have twice as less. Why? And you come and you find out that it's all leaking or something like this. So this is an extremely important tool to understand what's going on, where you waste your resources, where you should also concentrate first in terms of fixing the inefficiencies. So that's, I think, and I know the countries, again, in Western Balkans, it's part of mandatory policies right now, that energy management system is a must. Every municipality should have a manager, should have a software, should have this data as part of their regular reporting as on other aspects.
Yeah. But also, I think it's a national policy, as Matthias mentioned, and especially in Southeast Europe, this old technology of based on coal creates enormous amount of other problems, and at the same time, it's another case of business as usual. It's not easy to change the business aspects. Yes, Matthias.
I would like to just counter the fact a little bit that there is north and south. I think, I mean, it's the same technology everywhere. It's the same amount of management skills everywhere. In the cities in the south, you have the same divide between rich and poor as we have in Paris. So frankly, I don't think that there is, we are all faced with the same problem. Maybe it's my technocratic approach, but I reduce this to a governance issue. You know? Yeah. And I don't see why the South is worse off in terms of governance than the North. Actually, we see more difficulties in some of the old legacy city to actually do something. And so I think demand-side management can easily, they all have apps, sensors don't cost very much, and the efficiency potential is even bigger. And so I think investors who go into the South, they will look for these opportunities because there is just more savings to be made. Okay, so for me, this is, I mean, one of you had a very nice map, all these big cities everywhere. I don't see much difference. I mean, yes, in India we have some slums, okay, but we have slums in Brazil, and you can go outside of Paris and it doesn't look very beautiful either, you know?
Yeah.
Can I just add?
Yes, please.
We used to say, at least in my engineering background, we used to say fabric first. You know, first you take care of the fabric and then you look at everything else. But I think now we've turned into an age where it's data first. You put the sensors in, you know what the problem is, and then you go and fix it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So information is just knowledge, and data is knowledge. But I definitely think the developed world should share the knowledge to the developing world, and we should give them what we've learned all these years. As you say, the UK might be more advanced in demand-side response. Yes, it might be. The US, probably even more, a lot more. But these things need to be shared, and they need to be given the right tools, and we need to learn from our mistakes, and we should not be passing them on.
Thank you very much. Oturumu kapatabiliriz. Birkaç soru.
We can declare the session closed. There were some more questions. My suggestion is you can ask them tomorrow or the other day. You can personally ask your questions to the participants about your project experience. Thank you very much for staying late. And I want to thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution and for coming to Istanbul.